The morning air was still, heavy with the weight of the night's dampness. Grass bent gently under the touch of a passing breeze, carrying with it a sound that did not belong to the calm of dawn. At first it was faint, muffled, like wind threading through reeds. The rangers stopped in their tracks, heads turning toward the sound. It came again, a short, broken cry, desperate and raw. The men knew it was the voice of a calf. They moved quietly, following the thin trail of sound. The earth beneath their boots shifted from firm soil to softer ground, the kind that clung to soles and whispered of hidden water below. The smell of damp clay thickened as they pushed through the brush. Then, in the clearing ahead, they saw it. Half buried in the slick embrace of a mud hole lay a young rhino calf. Its body trembled with every shallow breath, its flanks caked in drying mud that cracked where its skin moved. The calf shifted weakly, but the more it tried to lift itself, the deeper its legs slid down. Its horn, barely formed, was tipped with soil, and its wide eyes glistened with panic. The rangers stood still for a moment, not rushing forward. They had learned long ago that stillness was often the first kindness. One of them whispered, almost under his breath, "Easy, little one." The words were carried away on the morning air, unnoticed by the calf, but a comfort to the man himself. Around the mud hole, the ground told its story. Large tracks, wide and deep, pressed into the earth, the unmistakable marks of the mother. They circled the hole, moving away toward the bush, fading as if she had been forced to leave, perhaps frightened off, perhaps searching for a way around. Yet she was gone, and the calf had been left behind. The silence of the clearing pressed close. Birds that usually filled the air with their calls were absent here, as though even they had felt the weight of the calf's struggle. The only sound was the labored breath and the soft, wet shift of mud whenever the animal moved. The rangers exchanged a look, their faces solemn. They knew what they were seeing. A calf, too young to survive alone, trapped in a pit that would not let go. The sun had barely climbed the horizon, but already its light glimmered against the surface of the mud, threatening to harden it further as the day grew warmer. Time was not on their side. The calf let out another sound, not loud but filled with a sharp edge of fear. Its ears flicked back, tail twitching in short, frantic movements. It tried again to push its weight forward, its muscles straining under the mud's grip. For a moment it lifted its chest above the surface, then slid back with a hollow thud. Exhaustion settled into its movements, each attempt weaker than the last. The men did not speak. Words felt too heavy here. They only watched, taking in the rhythm of the calf's struggle, the sinking of its limbs, the soft quiver of its body. Their silence was not indifference. It was a shared understanding of what was at stake. One ranger stepped closer, careful not to startle the animal. He crouched low, studying the edges of the hole, tracing the paths the mother's prints had taken. The calf turned its head slightly, eyes catching the figure for a fleeting second before sliding shut in fatigue. That momentary glance, brief and uncertain, carried with it the weight of a plea, one too fragile for words. Behind them, the sky began to shift, streaks of pale gold stretching across the horizon. Day was breaking fully now, and with it came the urgency of choice. The rangers had found the calf. The cry in the distance was no longer unanswered. But the mud was deep, the animal small and fading. The hours ahead would decide if this young rhino's call would end in silence or survival. The calf shifted again, a slow and uncertain motion, its small frame dragging against the pull of the mud. The sound was faint, just the wet suction of earth clinging to skin. Its sides heaved unevenly, each breath shallow, chest rising and falling with visible effort. The mud had dried along its back into pale ridges that cracked as the animal trembled, while lower down, its legs remained swallowed by the softer, deeper earth. It was a trap that held without relent, pulling more tightly the longer the calf struggled. The rangers stood just beyond the edge, their eyes fixed on the calf's weakened movements. They had seen animals in distress before, but there was something about the solitude of this moment that carried a heavier weight. A calf this young should not be without its mother. It should have been pressed against her side, shielded from the dangers of the world, guided through the grasslands. Instead, its eyes, wide and searching, found only emptiness where comfort should have been. The land itself gave quiet testimony. Wide imprints marked the ground not far from the mud, the deep, rounded shapes of the mother's tracks. They moved in a broken circle, as if she had paced with desperation before turning away. Whether fear had driven her off or some unseen danger had forced her back, the story ended the same. The calf was left behind, and the silence of her absence pressed against every breath it took. Above, the sun climbed higher, and with it the mud began to change. What had once been pliable from the cool of night now grew firmer, crusting at the edges, locking the calf in place as if the earth itself had chosen to hold it. The animal shifted again, a weak attempt to lift its head higher, and for a moment its eyes flicked toward the tree line, lingering there before closing halfway. The search for its mother had not ended, though the strength to continue it was fading. One of the rangers stepped closer, lowering to a crouch as his gaze swept the edges of the mud hole. He measured distances, testing the ground with the weight of his boot, careful not to collapse the fragile edge further inward. His companions waited in silence, their faces drawn with the same recognition. Time was narrowing. Each shallow breath, each sluggish twitch of the calf's ears, told them the young animal would not last long without help. The calf let out another sound, softer than before, not a cry but a broken note that fell quickly back into silence. Its tail flicked once, then stilled, body quivering as if caught between the will to fight and the pull of exhaustion. Small bubbles rose near its submerged legs, evidence of the weight pressing deeper into wet earth. The rangers watched, motionless, giving the animal space, yet every line of their posture held the readiness to act. "Hold on, little one of them murmured, voice barely audible. The words were not meant for comfort the calf could understand, but for themselves. A quiet vow spoken into the air. A vulture circled high above, its shadow passing briefly over the clearing before moving on. It was a reminder of how swiftly nature turned when weakness lingered too long. But below, the calf drew another breath, faint but steady, its ears twitching once more at the sound of the ranger's voice. The moment stretched, heavy and uncertain. The rangers knew they could not wait much longer. Each movement from the calf was slower than the last, its strength running thin beneath the weight of mud and solitude. They stood in silence, hearts steadying against the urgency that pressed in from all sides. Before them, a young life hung in the fragile balance between sinking and survival, and the choice to tip that scale would soon be theirs to make. The decision to move was made in silence. The rangers stepped forward slowly, their boots sinking into the damp soil that bordered the pit. Every shift of weight pressed water to the surface, the ground soft but holding. They kept their movements measured, careful not to startle the calf, whose wide eyes flicked weakly at the figures edging closer. The young rhino let out a faint groan, its ears twitching before folding back flat against its head. Its sides shuddered, the body trembling with the strain of trying to stay upright in the thick mud. The men carried no heavy tools, only rope, experience, and the kind of patience that had been learned over years of facing fragile moments such as this. One ranger uncoiled a rope from his shoulder, letting it fall in a soft arc onto the ground. Another moved to the opposite side, scanning the edges for the safest approach. They spoke rarely, and when they did, their voices stayed low, barely more than whispers lost beneath the wind. The calf shifted again, attempting to push forward, but the suction of the earth clung tight around its legs. Each movement made the mud ripple, releasing the scent of damp clay into the air. Its skin, slick with drying patches of soil, bore marks where it had rubbed raw against the pit's surface. The animal's hornless snout dipped briefly into the muck before lifting again with effort, nostrils flaring as it gasped in short, shallow bursts. One ranger knelt, pushing his hand carefully into the edge of the mud to test its grip. His fingers sank quickly, showing just how much weight held the calf down. He pulled back slowly, wiping the earth on his trousers, and gave a small nod. Another ranger tossed the rope in a loop, laying it gently across the ground so it would not snap or startle. They worked in unspoken rhythm, every step and gesture deliberate. "Easy now," one whispered, voice calm as the rope was eased closer. The calf turned its head, eyes dull with fatigue, but it made no sudden movement. Its body was too tired for resistance. The men slid the rope forward, inch by inch, until it rested against the calf's chest. Carefully, they adjusted it, pulling just enough to position it across the broad front of the animal's body. The calf let out a low moan, ears twitching again, its tail swaying faintly. The sound held neither defiance nor surrender, only the raw strain of exhaustion. Once the rope was set, the Rangers positioned themselves at different angles around the pit. They leaned into the earth, gripping firmly, bodies tense but steady. At the quiet signal of one man's nod, they pulled together, slow and even, the rope tightening across the calf's chest. The animal lurched forward slightly, a splash of mud rising as its forelegs shifted free for a moment before slipping back. The Rangers stopped at once, holding their ground. The calf's breaths came fast, flanks quivering under the strain. They waited. Silence fell again, broken only by the calf's rough exhale. When its chest slowed, the men moved once more, pulling gently, giving the animal time to respond. The calf managed to lift its head higher, its body rocking forward as the rope held steady. Inch by inch, the front half of its body began to ease onto firmer soil, though its hind legs still sank in deep. The work was slow, deliberate, each pause allowing the calf to gather what little strength it had left. The men adjusted their grip, shifting their stance, pulling again with care. The mud groaned under the weight, releasing a wet sucking sound as the animal's torso edged closer to freedom. The calf's breaths grew harsher, but its eyes remained open, fixed on the patch of solid ground just ahead. With another coordinated pull, the calf's chest broke free fully, collapsing onto the rim of the pit. Mud streaked its body, its head falling sideways as its legs remained trapped behind. The Rangers held steady, not rushing, letting the animal rest where it lay. They knew this was only the beginning. The earth had released part of its hold, but the hardest pull still waited, and it would require every ounce of patience they could summon. The rope strained once more, pulled in steady rhythm by the men who leaned back with their weight. Mud shifted, heavy and reluctant, until at last it gave way with a low groan. The calf's hindquarters lurched forward, legs sliding free with a spray of wet soil. For a brief, uncertain moment, the animal hung between balance and collapse, then toppled sideways onto firmer ground. Its body landed with a dull thud, sending clumps of dried earth scattering across the grass. The young rhino lay still, sides heaving with ragged effort. Mud clung to its hide in thick layers, streaked with darker lines where skin had rubbed raw against the pit's walls. Its eyes, half-lidded, flickered open and closed, torn between exhaustion and the instinct to rise. The Rangers remained at a distance, crouched low, their breaths heavy but measured. They did not move quickly, nor raise their voices. Patience was their tool now, as important as the ropes that had freed the calf. One Ranger reached for a canteen and, without haste, poured water into a shallow tin. He placed it carefully on the ground a short distance from the animal. The clear liquid shimmered in the rising light, carrying the faint scent of metal. The calf twitched its ears toward the sound, then shifted its head weakly, nostrils flaring as it caught the trace of moisture. Its tongue flicked once across its lips, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, yet it held the weight of life's quiet persistence. Minutes passed in silence. The calf struggled, attempting to push itself upright, its forelegs trembling under the strain. The effort ended with another collapse, its body folding onto the ground with a muffled groan. The Rangers did not interfere. They knew strength could not be forced. It had to return on its own, in its own rhythm. They waited, their eyes steady, giving space to the fragile breath of freedom the calf had fought for. Again, the animal tried, its body shaking as it pressed hooves into the soil. This time, its chest lifted higher, shoulders rising with an awkward lurch. Mud cracked and flaked from its sides as it staggered forward, one step then another before its legs buckled. Yet even as it collapsed, its head remained higher, eyes brighter than before. One Ranger whispered softly, "You're almost there." His voice barely carried beyond the space between them, but the words seemed to settle in the air, a gentle echo of encouragement. The calf turned its head, its gaze brushing across the figures nearby. There was no recognition in the human sense, only a stillness that lingered in its eyes. For a heartbeat, The wild and the human stood connected in silence, not by understanding, but by presence, by the fragile acknowledgement of life shared in a moment of vulnerability. The calf lowered its head toward the tin, tongue reaching clumsily for the water. It lapped once, twice before pulling back, strength not yet ready for more. Still, the act itself was a sign, a flicker of will that had not been extinguished by the mud's grip. The rangers let the quiet settle around them, relief showing only in the small easing of shoulders, the faint exhale of breath. The animal's body trembled less now, though it remained weak, its movements unsteady. It lay half-curled on the earth, mud drying into pale scales across its back. Each rise and fall of its chest carried more weight than words could hold, a rhythm of survival that pulsed steady against the silence of the clearing. The rangers stayed close but not intrusive, kneeling at the edge of distance. They knew the calf's fight was far from finished, but for now it was out of the pit, breathing air not bound by earth. Freedom, fragile and uncertain, had been returned to it, and that was enough to carry the moment. The air cooled as the sun began its slow descent, spilling a quiet glow across the plain. Shadows stretched long over the grass, and the world seemed to hold its breath with the young rhino. For a while, the calf lay motionless, sides heaving with the rhythm of recovery, every rise and fall a fragile proof of life. The rangers kept their distance, kneeling in the tall grass, their presence steady but unobtrusive. They did not touch, did not rush. In the silence, they allowed time to stitch the space between exhaustion and strength. Minutes passed before the calf stirred. A tremor ran through its legs, uncertain and awkward, as it pushed against the soil. Its movements were clumsy, heavy with weakness, but there was resolve behind them. The small body rocked, fell back, then rose again, driven by something older than fear, older than pain, the instinct to stand, to find footing in a world that demands movement. The rangers exchanged brief glances but said nothing more than a murmur of encouragement, one voice barely above the breeze. "That's it. Steady now." The words carried no command, only gentleness, spoken as if to soothe the air rather than the calf. The animal lifted its head, nostrils flaring as if tasting the earth itself. The faint smell of dust, grass, and water drifted across the plain. Its ears flicked at the soft rattle of insects waking in the dusk, catching every subtle shift in the landscape. Its eyes, wide and dark, met the human's once, only for a heartbeat. Not with comprehension, but with something that hovered at the edge of trust. An unspoken pause in the boundary between wild and man. Then, with a short, shallow breath, the calf staggered forward. Its first steps were crooked, almost collapsing beneath its weight. Each movement seemed uncertain, as though the ground itself shifted underfoot. But little by little, rhythm found its way into the trembling legs. The calf's body swayed, then steadied, carrying it slowly across the earth, toward the horizon where the light gathered. The effort was immense, every muscle strained, but there was no hesitation. Behind, the rangers remained still. They had done their part, and now the wild would take over. They offered no guiding hand, no lead rope or call. This was not their path to shape. The calf belonged to the silence of the plain, to the pull of instincts that might one day guide it back to a mother's call or the low rumble of a herd. The world around them shifted as evening deepened. Birds cut sharp lines against the fading gold of the sky, and the grasses moved with the hush of the wind. The calf stumbled once more but regained balance, pressing forward, legs unsteady but determined. It was a small miracle unfolding in slow, uneven steps. A fragile life reclaimed from the edge, now choosing its own uncertain direction. The rangers rose quietly, brushing the dust from their knees. No celebration passed between them, no loud word or gesture. Instead, they carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had intervened only enough, that their presence had bridged the gap between danger and survival, and nothing more. They stood for a while longer, watching the calf until it was only a dark shape against the soft glow of dusk. The silence stretched, heavy and full, broken only by the wind moving low through the grass. At last, one ranger gave a slight nod, and together they turned back toward camp, steps slow, careful, leaving the animal to its own uncertain journey. Behind them, the plane exhaled into twilight. The calf lingered near the horizon, a fragile silhouette framed by the fading sun. Its breath rose in thin clouds, its body swaying gently as it gathered strength. Somewhere in the distance, the land waited, holding the quiet promise of belonging.